of you know that I began my career as a stage actor. I was 9 years old when I was cast in a community theater production of Annie, and the acting bug has stayed with me ever since. I'll be honest, at first it was the applause that really hooked me, but I loved meeting new people, wearing fun costumes, singing and dancing with my friends. But as I got older, the reasons I loved theater so much began to change and grow. Today, I embrace the medium of theater as a beautiful method of sharing stories. Stories that may start out personal, but have a universal appeal. And in the world of death awareness and mortality, where I currently reside, theater allows us to tell the stories of the people who have passed, thus letting them live on in our hearts and minds. Y'all, I was delighted when I first came across the work of our guest today, Benjamin Kintish. He has taken the stories of the people he has served as a hospice chaplain and put them to song in a stage show called Life Review the Musical. There's humor, poignancy, sadness, but ultimately hope in this opus work. And I'm excited to introduce you all to him today. Welcome to Before You Go, the official podcast of Abode Contemplative Care for the Dying. At Abode, our mission is that we live in a world where death is not feared, and we live fully until we die. And we'd like to make that happen before we go. I'm Natalie Buster at Abode in San Antonio, Texas. Welcome to Before You Go. Benjamin, hi, how are you?
Hello, I'm great. I love San Antonio. I've had the pleasure of visiting once a long, long time ago, and it was delightful and beautiful. And then maybe I'll have to come back after making a new friend. So
I think
let's
so.
talk. Not to be presumptuous, but let's get going.
I know. Let's see where this conversation leads us, Benjamin. We just met.
Right.
My goodness.
Get me dinner before you fly to my city.
Benjamin, you're like one of the coolest people I've met for a long time. And you've untapped. Continue, please go on. You've untapped like a new life goal for me. You have created this beautiful musical tribute to the people that you've served and the stories that have been shared with you from people at the end of life. I wonder if you can tell our listeners and viewers just a little bit about Life Review the Musical.
Yes, thanks so much again for that incredible introduction and for welcoming me on your show. So Life Review is a musical comedy inspired by real life stories. I heard Bedside while visiting patients as a new hospice chaplain. Part of the work you do when you're training as a chaplain, which I was doing at the time, you visit and get hours and hours of experience, similar to how social workers and therapists do real life practice. You have a supervision meeting once a week, you have a class at night, right? So I was going through that program, hearing these stories while I visited Bedside. And one night while driving home, I called my wife. I said, honey, I think these stories want to be songs. She responded, get writing. So that night, after dinner, I picked up a journal book, one of those black and white books like we used to have in elementary school. And I started scribbling out the early notes of a song that actually made it all the way to the show to this day, a song called Will It Still Snow, inspired by a poem of the same title, used with permission, about a person imagining life after their own death. Now, this particular song that I began with was not specifically biographical about a real life person, but it was very much inspired by a real life conversation. All names and identities are changed to protect the innocent, and of course, HIPAA. But I'll tell you that the main fictional character is a lightly fictionalized version of a real life person, whereas everyone else are composites. The main character, the chaplain, played by yours truly, he looks like me. And I think he has some of my mannerisms, but other biographical biographical details are changed, right? So in my real life, my parents are both alive, knock on desk. But in the play, he, like so many characters, is an orphan and he's grieving the loss of his parents. In the opening scene, he's on his knees planting daffodils in memory of his deceased mother, who used to love to garden. In spring, at the end of the play, the flowers are blooming, a sign of hope and redemption. It's also a hat tip to Dear Evan Hansen, one of my favorite plays that ends with a similar botanical metaphor. So that's a real quick and dirty on Life Review, the Hospice musical. We can talk more about anything else, but that's the Genesis story and the big idea about what it's about.
Wow, I absolutely love that. And I love how you advertise this, how you pen this. It's a chorus line meets Fiddler on the Roof.
Yes,
Tell me a little bit about that.
I
Your
got you. I got you.
inspirations.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so chorus line, because many of the main characters in the show step forward or sit up in bed, as it were, to sing their story, right? In the way that chorus line, I talk about the musical monologue. That was sort of the revolutionary piece of chorus line, right? All those dancers, where they step forward, they sing the song, and you feel like you know them. So I tried to do that in many of my songs, especially those that were the big solo numbers. The other one, Fiddler on the Roof, has to do with what I call the Tevye moment, especially not just on the one hand, on the other hand, but also looking at the stage lights above the stage for a dialogue with the one above, with God, because our main character, Rabbi David, is a man of God. He's a chaplain, right? So you have to be a faith professional, clergy of some type to be a chaplain. He's a rabbi. I'm, by the way, a real cantor, but most people know about rabbis. A lot of people don't know cantors. So to simplify it, we made the character a rabbi. But he believes in God. He's faithful, but bad stuff happens to him, right? As happens to every person, regardless of where you are on the belief spectrum. I point out provocatively. But I think that's actually a matter of fact statement that's important for my play. And I think it's important for the general public, because the truth is, no matter who you believe in, what you believe in, so far, but for deities and legends, no human beings have lived beyond their death. To quote my funny opening song, everybody dies in the end. Sorry to ruin the play, my friend. Love it or hate it, it cannot bend. Everybody dies in the end. Yeah.
Spoiler alert, none of us get out of here alive. And I love how you
Right.
said, like, aside from certain deities and myths, everybody dies at the end. And
Everybody.
so I
And that's a tough
feel,
one.
yeah, it's
It's
a
tough,
tough
but
pill
we
to
have to say
swallow.
that opening number. In fact,
Hmm.
I was just in touch with my co-writer Jason earlier today, and I remember the moment when he and I met in his living room. We were drinking some bourbon, and I was trying to figure out if we would work on this collaboration. He told me he'd shared the idea with his mother, an older woman, and she loved it. And he said, "You know what? I think we have something here, but we need to start with a funny song to break the ice." And I'm like, "That's a good idea."
Hmm.
So our very first order of business was to think of that funny song. And he was like, you know, spoiler alert, everyone's going to die. I'm like, "That's funny. Everybody dies in the end." He's like,
Hmm.
"That's it." And I wrote
Hmm.
it down and I was like, "I'll work on that." And the song
Oh,
I wrote is great. It happens to be very long. As you can tell, I'm a man of many words. I won most talkative in high school, also most opinionated. So that one I think has 3 or 4 verses, and it was written as an ensemble number, but I currently am doing a one-man show, which means I get to sing that big number by myself, and then I'm out of breath, and then I got to narrate and do another 7 songs. But as I joke, who wrote this thing? Anyway,
you did.
no,
Yeah.
blame me.
Oh, I
Blame me.
love that. And I love how you bring humor in from the very beginning. And that's something that we try to do with this podcast too, is that these are bitter pills to swallow. It's one of, I think you said in your trailer on your website, like this is one of the last taboo subjects of our culture, is talking about death and dying. And what better way to enter into that conversation with a little lightness, a little levity. We still have respect for the people who have passed and the people at the end of life. But yeah, let's bring it back a little bit. Let's ease off, that seriousness and have that entry point through humor. I love it.
I think it's so important. You said bitter pill. I often say in interviews talking about comedy, hospice, why? And I quote one of my favorite musicals, Mary Poppins takes a spoonful of sugar to make the medicine go down. And so the medicine, the bitter pill, as you said it, is the tough reality of our shared mortality.
Mm-hmm.
I break the ice, or we break the ice with the funny song, and then we're off to the races going through this journey with this sympathetic character, our man, Rabbi David, and through him as it's sort of like he's our avatar. I haven't really thought about it like that before, but he's definitely the main character. And because we kind of see through his eyes, right? He experiences his journey. And so we go on his journey with him, right? And that includes all of these visits where he stumbles at first and has this faith crisis. And then his I Wish song. I know you speak theater. So in every musical, you need an I Wish song. His I Wish song is a theological wrestling because he's a rabbi. But put simply, it's called Send Me a Sign.
Mm-hmm.
And the sign that he wants is an answer from God, the God who seems to have not answered any of his prayers. And to drill more specifically, he was that faithful person who prayed for God to save his dying parents when they both went through their illness and dying journeys. But as we have established earlier in the show, no matter how much you pray, your elderly parents are going to go, God willing, before you do, because you don't want the older generation to bury the younger generation when that can be avoided. But I should say one of the most heartbreaking songs of the show is sung by a woman who's too young for hospice.
Yeah.
And she sings this amazing power ballad, the one about snow that I wrote first. So it was combined with the gorgeous music of Michael Miller, whose piano sounds a lot like Carole King, Billy Joel. And so his ballads are incredible. And when I sing that thing as a one-man show, I'm still this bearded guy, but like I step into the role of a woman who's just, dreaming of the snow and dreaming of skiing with her boys and missing it and not know. And like, I go somewhere deep. I recently performed this and I kind of broke into tears for the first time in a while. And someone who knew me was like, was that real? And I'm like, I was there, man. And then I had to turn around and like clean up my face and because now
play the next character. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, but you bring up an excellent point because this
Please.
work, you were drawn to serve people at the end of life as a hospice chaplain.
Please.
So I'm curious how that came to be, but then also bringing that to the world of theater, where we as actors are asked to play the truth of the characters that we're portraying, to really tell the truth of the story. How have you found maybe that journey to be for you from starting, from that first call to serve people at the end of life to singing their stories on stage?
Put simply, I was in a synagogue setting working as a cantor. Again, it's like a music minister in a Jewish synagogue. And we had a very elderly congregation. So based on demographics, we had a very specific need. I mean, to be blunt, if a church, mosque, or synagogue has more than a third over 65, you're going to have a ton of funerals. Especially if it's a small community. We had only 250 families, but 50 were 75 and older. The founders, like some of them were super old, like late 80s, 90s. So some of the people who had founded the synagogue as young couples when New Jersey suburbs were being built along the parkway, we're talking post-war. So everything from so they had moved there in the 1960s or the 1970s as a young couple. They were now old people when I was their new cantor. Because of that demographic wave cresting, we literally had about one funeral a month, sometimes two a month, which felt staggering. Oh, in addition to that, more hospital visits, major surgeries, because when you're old, you fall down, you break your hip. And then it's like, can you visit Mr. Moskowitz at the rehab? Can you go see Miss Cohen at the hospital? And not that it was a burden, but I just saw like, oh my God, the need is huge. And I felt like my skill set was not there. So that's why I pursued chaplaincy. It turns out that I loved hospice work, and along the way, pivoting to number two, we would visit bedside. I kind of reenact this moment in the play, and that kind of pivots to number two, right? So I had the sense that as I said in the earlier story, that these stories I was hearing bedside were great material for songs. And then as I started to write it and got some nice feedback from others that they thought it was a cool idea, I shared some of my early stuff. One early song, the one I described about snow, I shared in a not quite finished iteration with a small song sharing group at a Jewish education conference. So not even a music conference, but they had some music offerings, and I went to all of them because I'm a music guy. And I grabbed my songwriting book, and I was like super nervous about sharing, but I did. So good job being brave.
Yeah.
And half the room was in tears. And afterwards, the moderator, my now friend and mentor, Sue Horowitz, look her up on the internet. She's great, folk singer extraordinaire. She said, Ben, you've created something of great power here. Is there more material?
Mm-hmm.
I said, yes, there's some more songs. She said, I want you to keep working on it. And she said, whatever you do, I want you to bring it back next year to a late night. I'll give you a spot. You can do one or two songs. I said, I'll do two songs. And I got working. So at that point, I had some lyrics, and I kind of said to her, like, I think I'm good at the words. She said, then maybe you're a guy who needs to co-write. So do you know anyone who makes music? I thought to myself, that was when after that summer, I went home and initiated contact with my friend Jason, who I knew as a music guy, but had not yet done a co-write. So I asked him. That was the apocryphal living room story.
Yeah.
Of that. So he was on board for the project. The following summer, Michael Miller joined in when that same Sue Horowitz launched the inaugural Jewish Cooperative Songwriting Retreat, or JCSR. But Michael Miller and I became friends at that first retreat. No one had met him, and he was just like a wizard on the piano, self-taught, an unbelievable composer. And everyone was like, who is this guy? And I was like, I want him on my team.
Mm-hmm.
So I pitched him on the project, and he was like, that sounds cool. And he ended up co-writing half the songs along with Jason. I recently got a wonderful grant from Maryland State Arts Council. So thank you, states that are still funding the public arts and whatnot. So a growing creative team. And that's been part of how I've gotten this project from a crazy idea to a creative team to making it happen to staging it.
So what a journey. And isn't that like the life journey, like you start off with a big concept and then life happens and it changes the path for you.
Mm-hmm.
And what I love about this, what really caught my attention are the questions you ask in this musical. You ask, who are you? What did you do? Where did you go? Who did you know? Benjamin, why are those questions important, would you say?
So you're quoting the opening verse of the titular song, or the title track, a song called Life Review, in the musical called Life Review. And that song is structured with questions because it's meant to be a musical version of the Life Review interview. As in this clinical technique, when a clinician, chaplain, social worker, whatever, they visit and interview. It's a technique that I learned as a chaplain, and I thought that might make an interesting song. So what I wrote, it begins like this: knock, knock. The chaplain steps into the room. And so on stage, he is visiting the patient, but it's a bed without a person. And he quickly makes eye contact with the audience, breaking the fourth wall, and he sings to them, "Who are you? What did you do? Where did you go? Who did you know?" And it goes on. Why those songs? I wanted to start big and broad. So "Who are you" is the biggest of all, as in like what's your name, but like what's your identity? Who So some people might answer that as like I'm Ben Kintish, or I'm a white man, or I'm a Jewish man, or I'm upper middle class, or I'm a Brown alum, or like think of all the identifiers or signifiers we have, or music teacher, chaplain, playwright, songwriter, podcast interviewee, etc., etc. So I actually wrote this song in a way, honestly, I think it's maybe the song I'm most proud of, because the trick that I pull off is to get the entire room sitting in the bed, imagining themselves looking back on their own life when they are, to quote my song, with more yesterdays than tomorrows. So that, because not everyone in the room is necessarily in that retrospective space, especially if we feel like we are at an age where we're nowhere near our end, and whatever the age that might be. But whatever your current age, you can sit and hear this song and instantly reflect on who you are. Or I've been told by some listeners, it makes them think about their most recently lost loved one.
Mm. I can imagine that these questions also prompt the listener to evaluate their life. And
Yes.
am I living the life that I want to be living? It's that time maybe to do this deep self-exploration as a listener of this piece, I would imagine.
Well, I love that you go there to the place of self-reflection. I mean, that's a very powerful level uh, for listener and for me to hear that as songwriter. So thank you for
Mhm.
that gift.
Mhm.
I think good songs help us think about our lives in different ways. One of my musical theater heroes is Lin-Manuel Miranda. We were just re-listening to his opus Hamilton because we had a family visit to Philadelphia. So that masterwork ends, "Who lives, who dies, who tells your story?" Beautiful.
Yeah.
And I wrestle with many of those themes in my show, except it's not famous people. And
Hmm.
that's kind of the unique thing about this project, right? I made the joke in our earlier conversation about HIPAA, like all the names are changed for that reason, and that is literally true. And also artistically, we'll have some creative license. The thing is, the specific details of what happened bedside, they were all private. They were all secret. In fact, in that life review song I just described, at the most dramatic point, I say, "You can tell me your secrets if I earn your trust." And that's true. I had people who told me secrets. I can't share them with you today. That would feel like really cheap. But like some people told me some very old, dark secrets of every kind you can imagine. Not that I was a priest offering confessional. I'm a cantor, rabbi adjacent, but like, you know, people say dramatic things. Other people, they just want to unburden a regret, or some people wanted to say the thing that they're proud of or the thing that they're ashamed of. Like different people have different psychological needs in these end conversations. Also, to clarify, depending on the health and verbal expression of a given patient, I might have had the conversation with them. So, for instance, a lot of cancer patients, depending on the type of cancer, they might have full speaking even as the cancer is killing them, right? Whereas Parkinson's, you typically lose the ability to speak as it's bringing down all of your musculature. So someone who's late stage Parkinson's, I'm not going to talk with them anymore. I will talk to them. I will sing for them and bless them. But if I want a two-way conversation, it's going to be the spouse. right?
Mm-hmm.
But for other kinds of dying, I can literally talk with someone almost right until the end of their life.
Yeah.
And that means that, especially if I have multiple visits, which sometimes you get in a residential hospice, you can develop a rapport to the point that it almost feels like a friendship. And by the
Mm-hmm.
way, the most beautiful and essentially the central relationship, the only one that really travels from the first act until the end of the second act, is a friendship based very much on a real life person who I loved and lost in hospice. The fictional version is named Mr. Leroy Washington. So he's a super old African American guy. I believe in the play he's 103, or maybe 102. The real life guy was also beyond 100 when he was in hospice care, and I met and befriended him. The real life version of this man was a professional musician like me. So he and I could talk shop in a way that had nothing to do with his illness, and in a way inverted the power structure.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. When you're in the bed and you're dying, everyone who comes in, they're walking. They're younger than you, they're healthier than you. And in that way, you're always kind of beneath. But what he did, the real life guy, he used to tease me about my guitar playing, and that flipped the script. The real life Leroy teasing me about my guitar playing was so important because it reminded me that this wasn't simply a super old dude getting ready to die in hospice care. He was an accomplished musician who worked, I would later learn, for decades in some of the biggest Black churches in Bedside, Brooklyn. The One Man Show is available streaming, also for a fee, but I can do it live from this space. I hang a black curtain on that wall that's all colorful with art, and it looks like a performance venue. It looks and sounds great. And then that way you don't have to pay for my travel and lodging, but it's still a really engaging show. So if you're part of a community and your budget's a little bit tighter, you might still be able to engage with this material that way. So if any of that sounds good, please be in touch. Last thing I want to say for all of you creative people out there, or aspiring creative people, if you're in the death dying space and you have an idea and you're like, I don't know if this is crazy, I'm offering myself as a cheerleader to you, dear creator, because cheerleaders in my life, like Sue Horowitz, who I mentioned earlier, told me early on that I had something and it was worth pursuing. So if you think you have something interesting, you're a chaplain, a nurse, a doctor, a caregiver, a +1, or you're personally dying yourself, start writing. Pick up the pen, start writing, to quote Mr. Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Mm.
Even if nothing happens, you'll probably feel better when you're done writing. That's my promise.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if when you're done writing, you look back over it and you say, this is interesting. Maybe you have something that reads like poetry. Maybe you have something that reads like an essay. Maybe you have something that sounds like a song or a rap. Who knows? Or maybe you're someone who expresses it with visual arts. Whatever it is, if you have that thing that you want to share, I encourage you to create first and then be brave about sharing, because the world wants to hear what you have to offer.
Mm. What a beautiful sentiment to end this podcast episode on. Benjamin, thank you very much. I'm inspired. I know our listeners and our viewers are inspired. Where can people find you online?
Absolutely. So the website, lifereviewmusical.com.
One last question that we ask all of our guests.
I love one last question.
One last question. What do you want to do before you go?
Oh, I want to bring the show to Broadway.
There you go. Yeah.
That one was easy.
Let's put it out there.
Exactly.
Benjamin, thank you so much for joining us on
Thanks for having
Before
me.
You
It was
Go.
a great conversation.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Before You Go, the official podcast of Abode Contemplative Care for the Dying. At Abode, we believe death is not a medical event, and we are not medical professionals. We're just sharing our opinions, and these opinions shouldn't be taken as medical advice. You can find us online on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. This episode was edited by Make Your Day Richer.